Yes, welcome in. Back for another episode of The Camp, and we've got plenty to talk about. Unfortunately, only some of it's actual football, as the Xavier Lucas, as the world turns situation continues. And we have developments, obviously, Jesse, as we heard from both things that happened on Friday, and we heard from Wisconsin, we heard from the Big Ten. Darren Heitner, of course, won't shut up. So we have a lot to discuss here as this situation plays out. We'll also get into some of your transfer portal superlatives as you put that out Monday morning up on The Athletic. So if you haven't seen that, go check it out. We'll talk about that too. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of Xavier Lucas stuff today.
Or fortunately, if you're really into that, I know it's been an ongoing discussion for weeks.
Who's into it?
Look,
if you're not a lawyer, who's into it?
It's tiring and it's taxing, and it's also an unprecedented landmark situation. So from that aspect, I suppose there's quite a bit of interest, and now it's taken on a national story. So we'll get into all of it. Finally, Wisconsin speaks, and we have at least what their side of the story is.
Look, I'm not saying that it's not an interesting case, and I'm not saying that it's monumental, but I think all of us would be rather talking about Xavier Lucas and him stepping into a potential starting role at corner as opposed to talking about what he did and when he did it and Miami's knowledge of it and all that stuff. That's what I'm saying by, who's into this type of thing. Like, this is not what college sports, we don't want this to be college sports, but that's exactly what it is. And it's, as you said, tiring, I think did you use the word tiring? Yeah. It's very tiring. And this specific aspect of it is, yeah, I mean, as you said, it could be a landmark case precedent-wise, but I would rather be talking about football. But that said, we'll get into it. Again, as always, Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They have unmatched vintage gear in the college game, a ton of Wisconsin stuff, ton of every school. So go check them out, homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right, so Xavier Lucas is no longer enrolled at the University of Wisconsin. He has decided to enroll at the University of Miami, and that would be outside of the transfer portal window, which means the transfer portal doesn't exist because the NCAA said it. There's nothing wrong with what he's doing. Either way, that's not the more important part here. I guess it is because it triggered. Obviously, it triggered the statement from Wisconsin and triggered him being in, I guess, potential violation of this contract that he signed that offered up non-exclusive rights to Wisconsin, but it also meant he couldn't use those rights at any other school. There's a lot to get here too, Jesse, but your first reaction to just the overall nature of everything that happened, and if you would like to explain a little bit more, you're more than welcome to.
My first reaction is what a freaking mess this whole thing is. But there's a lot to that mess. So let's try to unpack it here as much as we may begrudge having to do so, given what's transpired here. So yes, I think one very important element to this is the transferring to a school outside of the transfer portal window. As people listening and watching know, have followed this story closely, Xavier announced that he was going to go into the transfer portal, and Wisconsin never put him in there under the NCAA rules. Supposed to have two business days to process that paperwork and put a player into the portal, which would then allow other schools to contact that player. So then Xavier on December 27th, which was the day before the portal window closed for Wisconsin players, put out a statement on X saying that Wisconsin had not put him into the portal, and so he was therefore not able to talk to schools. Air quotes. And so he ended up withdrawing from Wisconsin and enrolling at Miami, which is what triggered Wisconsin, I think, their willingness to put out a statement, because how can you do that and then not have any conversations with Miami's program? Of course, Wisconsin said it has credible evidence that that is what transpired. And so one element to this is the tampering aspect. I'm not going to sit here and be naive to the fact that tampering happens everywhere. I know for a fact it has happened with multiple Wisconsin players who stuck around, with people who leave. That's not related to the Xavier Lucas story specifically. I'm just saying like that element is not unique. But what is unique, obviously, is him straight up leaving and going to another school and skirting these NCAA transfer rules. And we'll see what that obviously means. Now, I had a chance to talk to his lawyer, Darren Heitner, on Friday after the Yahoo story initially came out about this aspect. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Well, look, he was taking a victory lap on Friday, and
of course he was. That's all he does. That's literally all he does. He takes victory laps on social media. That's all he does.
Yeah. So anyway, let's get to the Wisconsin part of this, because I think that's what really is important here at this point, because we've been waiting to hear from him. They declined to comment. I said before, Rob Master, the executive chair of the Varsity Collective, has consistently declined to comment. He declined again when I reached out to him on Friday, which is perfectly fine. They obviously knew that they had this in the works. And so what Wisconsin said is, obviously, the going to Miami, again, credible evidence that there was a violation there with the tampering situation, but it also has to do with the NIL-related agreements that he signed. And there were two of them, which I think are important. One of them was a 2-year arrangement with the school being able to directly pay Wisconsin. It's to directly pay Xavier Lucas. It's part of that revenue sharing situation. And the other one was with the Varsity Collective. And we don't know how much that was for or what that contract looked like. What I think is so fascinating with this aspect is the revenue sharing part, because what he signed, and his lawyer mentioned this as well. I know it's kind of come out that I think Sportico had a look at what this contract entailed from another Big Ten school. But essentially it's a memorandum of understanding that you will be compensated by the school through this revenue sharing process beginning in July when that is allowed, except that it hasn't officially been approved and doesn't get approved for a few more months. And so from that aspect, the Xavier Lucas camp is arguing that, well, Wisconsin didn't pay him anything from that, so he hasn't taken money, therefore he doesn't owe them anything. The other aspect was you had to be enrolled at that school no later than spring of 2025, and he's not enrolled. Wisconsin, of course, says, well, this is a binding contract, and you have to abide by these rules. You expect Wisconsin athletics to abide by this when you sign it, and we want to make sure that you uphold that standard on your end as well. So that is part of this too. I feel like I've talked for 100 years because this is extremely complex, convoluted, and there's much more to it. But I feel like that's kind of the crux of this situation on some of the tentacles at play here.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of people on Friday when this came out, because it came out about the same time that the I think it was the DOJ was talking about some of the stuff that was in the House settlement, and that they put out an didn't call it advice, but it was something like, what the judge should look at. They have some issues still with the House settlement, and the judge, and they should do it. They did it on a Friday, 3 days before a new administration is coming in. So I kind of took that as more of a show thing than anything else, because the people that are running the DOJ that just sent that are no longer going to be running the DOJ. There's obviously a lot of carryover, but the person at the top of it is different. And so I saw some like trying to grab onto that, and the House settlement's going to get blown up. And I just don't buy that at all. Like, I think this is eventually going to happen, but you're right. And this is something we talked about last month when this was happening. I said, because you were telling me he signed something and it was going to be obviously related to that thing. And I'm like, well, it hasn't passed yet. How do you sign something? And this is what they signed. They signed an understanding that when it is approved, this goes into effect. And that is something that you would think you have to abide by. And so to me, I as soon as that House settlement is approved, I just don't know how it's binding now. And I guess we'll see exactly how they view enrollment, as you said. Like, that's a part of it as well. But for this whole thing, like, I understand the transport part of it, because it's just such a huge, like, potentially, like, the transfer portal doesn't exist type of thing. But I think in terms of Wisconsin and the tampering thing too, what's going to come of that? You know what I mean? And is Miami going to fight this? Because if I'm Miami, I don't fight this for Xavier Lucas. because there is a whole lot more at stake for Miami long term. Because another thing we talked about last week, I think we agreed on this. Wisconsin was not alone in this. This isn't Wisconsin versus Miami or Wisconsin versus Xavier Lucas in Miami. This is Wisconsin and the Big Ten with versus them. And so Miami sitting in the ACC like they are, and they are a brand that there's no doubt they are a national brand, even though they haven't obviously won a national title in a long time. They are a national brand and they are relevant, but they're also in the ACC. And eventually, you would think that they'd want to get to someplace else other than that. And do they really want to go up and put a fight against the Big Ten for something like this? My guess is no, but I guess we'll see. Because this isn't just the Big Ten either. I think the SEC would also not come to Wisconsin's aid by any stretch, or with the Big Ten's aid, but I would assume they're maybe on the same page on this in terms of contracts needing to be honored and binding. And if you sign it, that's what you have to live by. And so there's so much at play here, big picture wise, in terms of how athletes are going to be not just compensated, but how they're going to be held to account for what they sign. And I think this, for me, Xavier Lucas, he's never going to play at Wisconsin, obviously, right? Like that, this whole thing was never about him coming back here. It was about, this was signed in the past. Some of these guys have taken money and gone elsewhere, like, and just left. This is the Big Ten and Wisconsin putting their foot down and at least putting up a fight. And I don't think this is like the NCAA putting up a fight. You know what I mean? Like this isn't NCAA bylaws. These are contractual agreements that are the result of litigation as part of this house settlement, right? So this is, to me, it's a little bit different than the NCAA limiting compensation or limit, like, because that's theirs, right? But this is legal stuff being signed. Contracts are not just, it's not just an NCAA thing. It's not an NCAA thing at all, really. Kind of is, but like, you know what I'm saying? This is a binding contract or in, you know, a memorandum of understanding. It's that's what it means to sign that. So Wisconsin holding him accountable. And again, he's gone, but his rights are still, and I think that's very, very intriguing as well. Just the idea of rights. And do they go with a guy, even if, or do they stick with the university until the end of this contract? And I think that's Wisconsin's take on it. But yeah, the Big Ten came out in support of him as well, saying, we stand in full support of Wisconsin regarding the contractual agreement between student athlete Xavier Lucas and the Wisconsin football program. And they went on and said it. This situation is just the latest example of the critical need for substantive governance reform. And I think we could probably agree on that.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a very important note here, is that the Big Ten is in full support of Wisconsin. And this was not done Wisconsin operating in a rogue situation. This has been a long time coming. There's a reason why Wisconsin didn't talk for as long as it did. And there's a reason why, as soon as Wisconsin released its statement, the Big Ten did as well. So there's still so many more questions here. I don't know what happens in terms of, will Wisconsin litigate this further? And if the Badgers do, what does that look like? If Xavier, obviously he's enrolled at Miami, and initially the enrollment is for the fall of 2025, though his lawyer said he felt pretty confident he'd be able to reclassify to the spring of 2025. So can you just play at Miami, but you can't receive compensation for 2 years as part of that agreement?
But like, it's not like, that's why I'm interested in what the varsity collective contract looks like, because the deal that Xavier signed with Wisconsin is not exclusive, meaning he can sign outside deals with other people, which he did with the varsity collective. But does that bind them? Does it bind him to the varsity collective, or can he sign additional deals outside of that? So like with Miami's collective or whatever that would end up looking like. But I think in terms of the contract right now, and we're talking about rev share and all that stuff, if that's going to be held in place, he can't sign anything with Miami.
Yeah. So,
And if he does, then he would obviously be in violation of that even further. And I think that may be the next step if we're talking about holding people accountable. If there was somehow some way that there was money ending up in Xavier's pocket from Miami, you would think Wisconsin would have even further legal recourse on it.
yeah, there's got to be a next step here. You can't just put out these statements and then nothing happens and he goes on. And obviously, Wisconsin is going to fight this. I just don't necessarily know what that looks like, but it is just indicative of where we are in college athletics in general, that the NCAA has no jurisdiction on anything anymore, basically. And again, the NCAA says, yeah, you could just you just go to another school. Nothing that says you can't.
Does the ACC step in and be like, because again, this opens up just a huge headache that I don't think anybody wants further. And so does the ACC be like there's nothing against the NCAA. I don't know. I think he ends up being eligible next year, but I think there's other stuff at play here, and that it's not going to be the NCAA. Obviously, it's the absolutely toothless organization at this point.
Yeah, right. It's very complex. I don't know what else there is at this point that we haven't shared. I mean, like the details we're not going to get. We're like the varsity collective contract and what that entails. And because I mean, that's another part of it. You can say if you're in Xavier Lucas camp, well, he didn't take any money, he doesn't owe any money, but that's strictly pertaining to this revenue sharing thing that is supposed to kick in July. He's getting paid, and the varsity collective is paying people. So what does that look like? And how much money is at stake there? I know Wisconsin said there was significant money. I think that was in relation based on the
rev share
2-year revenue sharing agreement.
Yeah.
But what is the collective aspect of this?
Well, and the collective aspect of it is I don't think that it's tied. Is it tied to one school? You know what I mean? Like I don't. Perhaps it is. You would, but the pay for play thing isn't. I'm not going to jump into that. That's fine.
It's absolute nonsense that this contract, this MOU says that it's not pay for play. And I had heard this from other people who signed with Wisconsin. It's not a Wisconsin thing. It's part of this Big Ten contract. They can adjust the compensation based on what you do. Like if you're a backup and you sign a deal, it's, hey, if you become a starter and you have a bigger role, we'll revisit your compensation. And it works the other way too. Feels like pay for play.
That's also going to be fascinating to play out and how it looks in the locker room. You know what I mean? Like if a guy, because we guys are leaving because they're not getting playing time now, but if they're not getting playing time and their money is starting to go down because they're not getting playing time, even though they think they should be getting playing time, it's just going to be an absolute shit show. I would think, like a guy like, just take for example last year, a guy who was a starter and then all of a sudden ended up not playing. Ches Malusi, right? Like if he had actually stayed with the team and he had a rev share thing where, Tyree Walker is getting 20 carries a game and Ches is getting 5 or 6, as opposed to the deal that he thought he was initially signing, the stuff that pops up out of that is going to be not fascinating. It's going to be absolutely brutal to watch. Here's, again, I am not, and neither of us are, so I won't put you in my category because you're a lot more red than I am. But in terms of this, like the legalities of it, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer. I don't know anything past what I read and when I read it and think about it. I'm not going to pretend to be a good lawyer, kind of like Darren Heitner. I'm not going to pretend to be a good lawyer. But this is just when you zero in on it, very fast. Like it's a fascinating case, and I think it is going to have significant impacts on college athletics. But it's just such a pain in the ass and something I just don't want to do.
Yeah.
So there, I'm glad that there are the Ross Dellingers of the world that are tackling it the way that they are, and certainly he's not alone. Obviously, you've talked to people and written about it, and Colton Bartholomew's talked about it and written about it. So it's like I appreciate that because this is it's very, very murky and everything, and trying to write and talk about this when you don't know important details is not ideal.
Yeah. Another aspect of this that's unrelated to the whole contract stuff, but if I'm thinking about it from Wisconsin's roster management perspective, what sucks for the Badgers? they lost all these cornerbacks, and some of them were frustrated with their role, in part because Xavier Lucas had passed them, so they're out. And then Xavier Lucas is gone, so you have to totally remake your cornerback room. Again, unrelated to the landmark case that's at play here, but Wisconsin, as of December 2nd, is thinking, okay, this is what we have moving forward, and this is what our roster is going to look like. And then 2 weeks later, Xavier Lucas is like, no, I'm out of here, even though Wisconsin's already lost like 3 or 4 corners. So I just think that's kind of a fascinating element to this as well.
You've talked to his dad too, right?
I have.
Is he doing okay medically?
So I can't speak to that aspect. I will say, look, obviously in the Yahoo story, what the lawyer was arguing in part was when Wisconsin called, or when Lucas and his family called, and he said they talked to Luke Fickell and what was a desperate plea to have this thing be solved. Part of the rationale was we want to be closer to home and that the dad was dealing with a life-threatening situation. Look, I don't want to speculate on that. I know when I called his dad the first time, he said he had just gotten out of the hospital. I don't know what the particulars are of that. I can say that during this process, I spoke to his dad on numerous occasions. But in terms of trying to get information out for the purposes of me being a reporter and just interest of transparency, I said this once before, he's really removed from the situation. This is more Xavier and his mom. I think his dad even said, like, I thought everything was fine. He didn't even know that the kid was intending to transfer, but he's like, they went out to dinner, his mom and his grandma, and then everything changed. But again, he just doesn't have enough information didn't have enough information for me to use it in a story. I could talk about it on our show because it's just a different medium. But I do know I spoke to him several times during this process until Friday when nobody answered.
Yeah. So I think that I'm not saying there's nothing there, but the idea that that's why you did it, or that's, wanted to get close back to home. And he used, I mean, that was in the Yahoo story. I think you just said that. And that's fine. But that's really, I mean, that's very lawyerish. That's very, to say that when we know that is not the reason you're doing it, that there was contact with Miami before this, and for you to throw that in there to try and get some kind of obviously people feeling bad for Xavier, and that's the reason you went home. I know it's what you do as a lawyer. I get that. But it's also a shady thing to do when we know, because people have talked to his dad, specifically you, that he had no freaking clue that this was happening. And if they were doing it for that reason, he would know about it, would he not?
Again, speculative.
Yeah.
I feel I didn't put it in my story on Friday. It's like I don't know that I agree with that argument. Not that it's my, I write things to try and play it down the line, but it's like I know that I had talked to him on several occasions, and so I don't really know the veracity of that claim, and just putting it out there without being able to verify it to me felt not right. I'm not saying that it's incorrect, but yes, again, it's a Xavier and his mom and that side type of situation based on what I'm gathering.
Yeah. Anything else on this? I'm sure we'll be talking about it again.
Yeah, I was going to say I hope not, but this is the case that certainly won't go away.
It won't go away, and obviously, Wisconsin will have to like. I don't. What comes out of the tampering thing? Like, I don't know that there's going to be like any kind of because Wisconsin's putting itself out there and saying that, oh, you guys have never tampered, right?
Yeah,
this is. I'm not saying. I don't think that is the biggest part of this conversation.
No, I don't either.
Maybe it's a sign to Miami that don't get involved, or this will, like, don't get involved, or we will pursue this. But I don't think that there's anything like serious that's going to come out of that. Especially, I mean, the NCAA. It's the NCAA. What are they going to do?
Yeah, that particular aspect, I'm not sure, but obviously that was him going to Miami was the impetus for Wisconsin to then be able to say these things, like, "Hey, you signed this agreement with us, and we have evidence that you are doing this. But again, it's not Xavier Lucas specific, but we both know that tampering goes on everywhere. Um, and I'm not suggesting I have a situation where Wisconsin was doing this. I do know, again, that current Wisconsin people or people who have played for Wisconsin recently have had schools contact them or third parties on behalf of a school, not necessarily directly to the player, and be like, if you came here, here's what we'd offer you. We'd offer you X amount of money. We'd offer you the lease of a car. We'd offer you a paid for living situation. And that's not unique to one school. It happens everywhere. So it is all part of what has become the Wild West, but not the biggest element to this specific situation.
I think it's also crazy that it's not just the top players either, right? It's not even just the top players that this is happening to. We heard about the Quinn Ewers thing, right? The whatever it was, like 7 or 8 million to come to transfer. And, for him, it was either Texas or the NFL. But it's not just those guys that this is happening to. And Xavier Lucas is a different situation because he was obviously he played last year, but he was a big time recruit. There have been other guys that were not big time recruits that maybe don't have a ton of stats that are and just everything, and yet teams are lining up because certain players in certain places and certain things that, we desperately need this. We have this money. Let's go. So we think about the top players, but it's not just the top players that this is happening for. All right. Do we want to jump into some of your portal superlatives?
We got to jump into something else because it's been a lot of minutes spent on the Xavier Lucas situation. I hope we did it justice or as much as we can.
At this time, yes. Wait. Excuse me. Before we move on, what does a win for Wisconsin look like?
In this situation? That is a very good question. Presumably upholding what was signed in some capacity. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I suppose it would be some type of consequence for Xavier Lucas that sets a precedent for future situations. And this is not just a Wisconsin battle, right? This is obviously a lot of other schools and why the Big Ten is backing them. But there are going to be people that probably side with Xavier, and certainly I know on Miami's side they are, but other people who are looking at this saying, well, there has to be some consequence for signing somebody. You want to be treated like a professional, and this is professional sports now. You have to uphold the contract. So I feel like that's what a win looks like, because it's not going to be like, oh, Xavier Lucas is coming back to Wisconsin and he's starting next season. As we know, that the horse left that barn a long time ago. So I'm open to hear your thoughts on what you think a win for Wisconsin looks like, but I think it's something that shows that what they did, they were in the right, and moving forward, their case was shown to be valid and there was a consequence.
Yeah, I don't know about a consequence, but I think because I don't even like what's the consequence? He can't make money at Miami for a couple of years, right? Like that.
Maybe.
To me, this is about the future of it. This is about if you sign something and you leave, there are consequences for it.
Yes.
But I don't know if that's going to happen for Xavier Lucas, because I think this is going to take a while to play out. And by the time, maybe they'll allow him to make money, or maybe they'll say, hey, Wisconsin's contract is, or the memorandum of understanding is, when it eventually goes into effect in April, assuming it gets the House settlement gets approved the way it is, which there's while the one part of the DOJ thing on Friday was, I thought, a show. The Department of Education the day before with some of the Title IX stuff, I think that is a little bit more that potentially could be a little bit more interesting in how this all plays out, because sharing money with certain and what's the impact on the rest of an athletic department and all that stuff. But in terms of setting a precedent, I think this setting the precedent of, like, if you sign something, even though yes, you can go other places, your rights stay here. Wherever you sign something, your rights stay, and until that contract is up. And so for Xavier Lucas, that would be 2 years. And I think that would be a win for Wisconsin. My question is, do you think it's worth it for Wisconsin to be the front face of this, the fronting face of it. And because, I mean, I guess they don't really have I mean, they've decided to be that. It is what it is now. Is it worth it?
I suppose what I would respond to that is, what is the backlash or consequence for Wisconsin doing this moving forward? And what you'll hear people say is, why would anybody ever go there again? And I mentioned this on the last show. It's insulting our intelligence, because they offer those two things: chance to play in one of the two super conferences, a chance to earn significant financial compensation. And I think what they're just trying to uphold some standard here that can be universally applied moving forward. So I don't have a problem with them being the face of this. It's also important to note, Wisconsin didn't set out to be the face of this situation. They fell into a situation where this arose, and Wisconsin was at the center of this because it just so happened the Badgers had a player that signed an agreement that then left. So I don't have any issue per se with them doing this. And I just think the question would be, is the juice worth the squeeze? And they obviously feel that it is, for what it means to protect them as an organization moving forward. And other people are siding with them because of what it means to protect their school or their conference.
Yeah. I think it's cost reward, right? Like what it costs you for the reward that you're going to get. And look, I have no problem with Wisconsin doing what they're doing. And I don't think it's going to affect recruiting. Again, would obviously have to talk with some of the recruiting folks to see exactly what their feeling is on this. Haven't heard a ton from that side of things, but there is value in it. I think there's definite value in it, and we'll see. But you have to win.
Yes.
If you don't win, and to me, you're not taking on this case unless you feel very, very confident that you have a very, very good argument to be made, because we've seen the NCAA get embarrassed time after time in court. This is a little bit, as I said earlier, this is a little bit different because of the aspects of what was signed. And I think you have to uphold it, because if you don't uphold it, then what's to stop the next person doing it? And so if you like that could also be an argument in court, right? Like if you let Xavier Lucas go and then say somebody else does it in the spring, they're just going to point to Xavier Lucas. Well, why'd you let him go, but not let me go? And so I think that there's that's that's the precedent, right? Like this is putting our foot down, not just us, the Big Ten. I think the Big Ten was probably looking for one of these cases as an opportunity to do something like this, and it just so happened that Wisconsin was going to be it. And maybe other schools have had to deal with it, and whichever school came up next was going to be them, and it turned out to be Wisconsin. Unfortunately, unfortunately not because unfortunately because we are having to talk about it, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would argue this is not specific to Xavier Lucas, but since we haven't done a show since this last happened, the Jaron Mock situation, the quarterback committed in the 2026 class, is not a national story, right? 3-star quarterback from Ohio. I would argue that has the potential to be something people look at and inquire about Wisconsin and what it means for recruiting more than this. Not that Wisconsin is in the wrong necessarily, because you change coordinators, you don't necessarily fit. But for those who don't know, Wisconsin informed Jaron and his family that he was no longer going to be a part of that 2026 class because he didn't fit what they were looking for anymore. I think that's something that you look at and say, oh, well, like, what could that mean for me down the road, as something more interesting in my mind about what it means for recruiting.
Yes, because I don't disagree with that. Relationships, though, they matter. They do. I get that. Money still speaks, and
but Wisconsin still has it.
Has what?
Money
to spend. Yes.
And
that's not on Jaron Mock.
Sure. Yeah, I guess
that's what I'm saying. Like they'll go spend that money on, like, I get it. It's a bad look, but it's also if he's not a fit, and it never, quite honestly, Jesse, I don't think it ever really made a ton of sense. I felt Phil Longo as a quarterback evaluator, for whatever it is worth, just zeroed in on guys that had done very little. Even though, like, the traits, but like just had done very little. And I think, maybe Jaron Mock goes on and is fantastic and finds a home somewhere else. But you look at his offers, they weren't necessarily slapping people in the face with him. So we also have seen two of Wisconsin's quarterbacks end up at Sam Houston State with Mabry Matoyer and Landon Locke. So yeah, I'm interested to see how that plays out. But Wisconsin, the future of Wisconsin's quarterback room is now at Sam Houston State. So it is what it is. Are you okay with the Jaron Mock situation? Not are you okay, but were you caught off guard by it?
So I would say it's not a surprise because essentially Wisconsin is now, not essentially, they have wiped the slate clean from every quarterback linked to Phil Longo. The four that obviously were in the room last year have since entered the transfer portal. Now Cole LaCrue committed to Wisconsin before this new staff came in. But then, as you said, you had Landon Locke, who ended up moving on. You've now got this Jaron Mock situation. And of course, the transfers, Tyler Van Dyke's not there anymore. Mordecai used up his year of eligibility. But I think the thing that stands out, and it's just one side, but I don't necessarily have a reason to doubt the claim, is from Jaron Mock's dad saying, like, we didn't talk to anybody. They went to the Oregon game. Obviously, we know what happened the day after Phil Longo got fired. He said that he reached out to people on the staff and they didn't hear from anybody. And I think that, if true, is something that you look at and go, like, he couldn't have just said, okay, we're waiting to hire a new offensive coordinator. Hang in there. We're going to wait and see. And we can't guarantee whatever. And he's like, this is fine because we have another year. I mean, he's going to have opportunities, but there were schools that were inquiring and we're trying to honor our commitment and not talking to other schools. So there's always two sides of the story. And I think that's another side about, honoring commitments and things like that. But again, if you're a school, you have every right to do that. You've committed. You haven't signed.
I was going to say, did Wisconsin sign something?
No. So I think it's more the way that it sounds like it happened, according to Jaron's dad, of like, there were 2 months where we didn't hear a thing from anybody. But it is what it is.
If you don't hear anything for a week or 2 weeks, you're the quarterback in a class, right? You're the quarterback in a class. If you don't hear anything in a week or two, I think you kind of know what's what, right? Like,
which is what the dad said. Like, I know what's going on, but
he went 2 months without it.
Well,
or is this a situation where, like, he didn't want to get a hold of anybody eventually because they knew what it was going to be?
No, that's not my understanding.
No, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's going to be bad news, so like you avoid it.
I don't think so. Not based on my understanding, because you would have liked to have known. I know that there were at least a couple of schools, I put this in the story, that were like seeing what was happening, and in recent weeks we're trying to reach out, and they're like, well, we're not going to talk to you right now because we want to be a part of this place. Again, you as a school can do what you want, but not communicating for a couple months is, if true, not the best look.
Is what it is. All right, portal superlatives. You went down the list of Wisconsin's 20 plus, or what is it?
19, including 19. Anderson, the punter, who's, I think, non-scholarship, so like 18 scholarship.
All right, 18 scholarship players. To give us some superlatives, we don't need to go through all of them, but let's throw a few out here. Most important addition.
I went with Billy Edwards Jr., despite the fact that it seems like nobody was all that excited about the addition initially. And I think I put, there's probably a few reasons why. Maryland went 4-8 last season, and it's the third straight one and done guy they've brought in. So the last 2 years probably clouded. But Wisconsin absolutely needed something definitive. They needed a veteran with starting experience at the Power 4 level, and they went and got it. And just because you may not be particularly excited with that doesn't mean that he can't elevate this offense and try to set the foundation for what the future can be offensively under Jeff Grimes. This is a guy that still finished third in the Big Ten in passing yards with a not good offensive line and a not good running game. So he's going to have a better offensive line to block for him. And the hope would be a better running back room. And that's why I think it's just so important. It's quarterback. It's the most important position on the field.
All right. It's an important ad. And if they're going to have any chance of being successful, he needs to be better than what they've gotten out of the position the last 2 years. Most important positional upgrade.
Yeah, it's defensive line without a doubt. Maybe when all is said and done from the cornerback room, assuming that they continue to add, and it remains to be seen, there's still a spring window, but they had 11 scholarship D linemen a year ago. Then there's only 3 left, and only one of them played more than 139 snaps. So they went and got 5 portal ads on the D line. And we talked about this when we went through our defensive 2 deep. Possibility that everybody that's a starter, if there's 2 or if there's 3, are going to be new people. So I think it's without a doubt. Now you could say quarterback, because we should also mention they got Danny O'Neal from San Diego State, but 5 guys in one room to totally remake the room. I think that's why I went with them.
Most intriguing.
Matthew Trainer from Richmond is who I went with, because I think this is part of the strategy for Wisconsin. If you're going to go down a level, the hope is that you can bring in people with multiple years of eligibility. It's the new definition of recruit and develop is get them young with multiple years of eligibility. Mark Hamper, the wide receiver from Idaho, is a similar example. 3 years of eligibility. This is a guy who was a conference rookie of the year at Richmond and very well could start this year, depending on how things shake out. If Austin Brown ends up playing in the slot, certainly, because you have Preston Zachman, and then it's either him or Matt Young, the guy from Bethel, and a bunch of young guys. So I'm really intrigued by him. He played pretty much everywhere. Could play in the box, play in the slot, obviously play on the back end, and I think he can complement Preston Zachman really well.
Best playmaker.
To me, it's the guy in the picture here on the portal superlatives, Tanner Koziel, because his numbers at Ball State were absurd. And I don't expect those numbers to be replicated at Wisconsin, but getting a guy who caught 94 passes in one season and 8 touchdowns is something Wisconsin hasn't had at tight end, obviously, for a while. I mean, very clearly, we went over the numbers, but it's the best tight end they've had from a playmaking standpoint since Jake Ferguson, who's doing all right for himself in the NFL. And the other thing is what this can mean for the red zone. We know Wisconsin was not great in the red zone under Phil Longo. Koziel caught 8 touchdowns last year. All of them were in the red zone. He's 6'7", 237. Maybe he'll be 240 something by the time Brady Collins gets done with him. I just think it's a huge ad for Wisconsin at a position that's going to be utilized even more now under Grimes.
Most underrated.
I went with Jameer Latimer, the cornerback from Jacksonville State. Obviously, Deone Hill is the other guy they got, power 4 guy from Miami, which, by the way, Florida guys still coming to Wisconsin. I think that's important to note. But I just think Latimer, he played more snaps than anybody in that cornerback room, played more snaps a year ago than even Ricardo Hallman did, and might not be getting talked about a ton, but to me is somebody who can certainly help them right away. And maybe some of this is dependent on what Wisconsin ends up doing when all is said and done with that cornerback room, because it feels like there's still not enough unless they move some of those freshman safeties to corner.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, last one, biggest upside.
Mark Hamper, I think, is who I went with.
You did. Yep.
Good thing. Confirmed my own report. I really like what he did at Idaho a year ago, and I wrote the story about him a week or 2 ago, but the dude had 3 FCS offers out of high school. Nobody really understood how to recruit him positionally. Sacramento State offered him as a tight end because he was such a big dude, but wasn't all that fast. Then he goes to Idaho and shows what he can do when you're a very smart route runner. You're physical. You know how to get open. A lot of his completions were on screens or intermediate throws. So he doesn't have to take the top off, but he's a possession type of receiver. And again, much like Trainer, he's got 3 years of eligibility remaining. And one of the reasons he picked Wisconsin is because he felt like he could develop over time. That still matters, especially for a place like Wisconsin. So huge numbers. Well, as we've talked before, productivity matters even at lower levels. So I'm just really intrigued by him, and he could end up a starter. He could end up on the other side of Vinny Anthony next season.
He could, certainly could. Would that be what you're projecting?
It's what I projected in my initial 2 deep. Get back to me after the spring, because
you're locked in.
Well, nobody else on the roster other than Tretch and Vinny caught more than a pass last year, but we talked about Joseph Griffin Jr. What would he have done if he were eligible? I mean, I don't know. We saw him a little bit in the fall and he was with the third team, but maybe that was just because he needed some time to acclimate. He wasn't there in the spring. So maybe he'll be the guy. Maybe Jaden Ballard will be. I mean, only has 11 catches in 4 years at Ohio State, but that doesn't mean he can't come in here and be a key guy in his 1 year left.
Do you think they talked to the Ohio State people at all before, like, bringing him on? Like, just because of their ties there?
I mean, if someone's willing to talk to you and you can do your due diligence, you probably want to learn something about him. But Ohio State was also busy being really good and getting national championships.
Yeah,
I would hope they tried to talk to somebody to be like, what's the deal here?
Yeah, for sure. All right. So that is the portal superlatives. Before we go, want to say congratulations to Monte Ball, who is going into the College Football Hall of Fame, was selected. There's some big names in that class. Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, I think Michael Vick is in that class as well. So it is very impressive. He obviously left school as the all-time leading rusher, leading touchdowns, most touchdowns. He does not hold that record anymore, but he left here as that. I believe it was 83. He had 83 touchdowns. So congratulations him going in. I don't think he should be the only running back from that era that should eventually end up there. I certainly think Melvin Gordon should as well. We'll see if he does. I mean, he put up 2,587 yards in a season. And that obviously wasn't his only year, but to be in the top 10 in the rushing and Big Ten history, even though he only were there for 3 years, I think it's impressive. So he probably deserves to be in there as well. And the national championship game, you mentioned it. They play tonight. Notre Dame, Ohio State. Who you got?
Ohio State. Pick 24-14. They've just been
24-14?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess they didn't play great offensively against Texas.
It'd be a lot of points. Two really good defenses.
Yeah, exactly. For whatever reason, I trust Ohio State. I know it, as long as it's not Michigan, I trust Ohio State, right?
That's fair.
Trust Ryan Day to get it done. But yeah, Notre Dame getting to the final, making $20 million, just getting to the final and don't have to share it with anybody. Whereas Ohio State obviously has to share it with 17 other teams. So it's good work by Notre Dame. Why would you ever join a conference if you could just end up in the national championship game every year making $20 million? But should be a good game. Interested to see how it plays out. I got Ohio State as well, for sure. All right, so little, not even housekeeping, but a little planning here. Wisconsin is making their assistants available for the first time since, their new assistants available for the first time since their hire. So obviously Jeff Grimes and Jack Cooper, and the other new assistant's going to be available for us to speak with on Tuesday. So we'll be talking about all that and have plenty to get football wise to talk about after spending a lot of the show on non-football stuff. So looking forward to that. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is. Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.